Typically, so good evening. Good evening, everyone. Typically, we'll meditate first, and then I'll give a teaching. But I think that tonight is a beginner's class, and a beginner's class I would normally start with just the instruction part. So I think I'll do that just the same. So the title of the class and on the newsletter, etc., is an introduction to meditation and mindfulness. But really, a more accurate title would be Introduction to Meditation and Mindfulness as taught by an enlightened or an awakened human being. Because there's all types of applications of mindfulness and all different, almost an endless number of so-called meditation techniques. And I say so-called, some meditation techniques are really contemplation, and that's quite different than what meditation is. And then there's many things called meditation that are really substitutes that aren't the same, such as walking meditation or visualization or gazing at candles or objects or anything. Those are meditation techniques. You might even call them mindfulness techniques, and they might be useful, but they're simply not what an awakened human being taught. And so that's what an introduction to meditation and mindfulness is within that context. I've tried, I was going to say hundreds, but at least dozens of meditation techniques. And they never really did much for me, except lead to more confusion as to why I was doing what I was doing. And I didn't realize, and I always blame myself, and that's often how those techniques are presented, especially in the Yogacara or mind-only schools, that meditation is simply about clearing your mind and having this intense, continual focus of having a clear and empty mind, which is really impossible to do. That I always blame myself that I wasn't doing it correctly. And it wasn't until I came to the teachings of the Buddha and studied what he taught and then understood why he taught what he taught, that meditation made sense to me and it became useful for me and actually had a practical benefit, which was develop concentration. So Siddhartha Gautama, the man who would become the Buddha, set out at the age of 29 to understand, if it was possible, the nature and the cause of suffering in human life. He left the palace grounds at 29, looked around the countryside from an unedited and unobstructed view. In other words, his father had shielded him from the realities of life until that time, King Suddhodana, thinking that if he could do that, then his son would not be inspired towards saving the world and would remain in the kingdom and take over the throne. Obviously, that's not what happened. And it's when the Buddha saw an unobscured view of humanity, he was so shocked by it that he decided that he was going to leave the palace grounds and wander around northern India seeking understanding, which was common for men of his age and at that time in India. So he left his wife and his young son and started seeking understanding and seeking if he could find out. His quest was to find an understanding of suffering and if there was a way to bring that suffering to cessation. And so he wandered around northern India for about 6 years. He studied with some of the foremost teachers of that time, two in particular, Alara Kalama and Udeka Ramaputta. And he mastered their meditation techniques and he mastered their doctrine in a very quick manner. And so much so, they were so impressed with young Siddhartha that they pleaded with him to stay with them and be their senior, they didn't really call him a monk, but be their senior representative. And all the power and benefits that would come from that. They had many, many thousands of followers. But the Buddha found that their doctrine was lacking, and so he left them. He continued to wander around northern India with 5 other guys that he befriended, and they began some very severe ascetic practices. The thinking back then, and it's the same thinking now, that if you could deny as much as possible any physical need, that somehow that would free your mind from your body, and somehow that would lead to understanding. Very, very common practice, again, then and today. You can still see examples of severe asceticism all over northern India and some other parts of the world too. And so that doing that severe ascetic practice gave the Buddha and or the future Buddha a perspective that if he hadn't had the life that he had, he wouldn't have that perspective. In other words, when he was a younger man, he was engaged in and encouraged to indulge any sensory impulse that came across him. Any sensual desire, he would fulfill it. It would be fulfilled immediately, and often even that was overplayed by his father. So he had everything anybody could ever want. He had prestige, power, money, etc. And that proved to be disappointing to him. That's why he left the palace grounds. And then he spent these years in these ascetic practices, experiencing just the opposite, this complete self-denial. And it said that the Buddha had trained himself to live on a grain of rice or one bean a day. And even in some of his own accounts, he said that he could touch his spine by touching his belly. That's how emaciated he was. So this went on for a while. And one day he's walking down the road, and he had left those 5 buddies because he didn't think that this was really working for him, but he didn't know what to do. And he passed out on the side of the road and rolled down a little hill into a river. And a young girl of 12 years old, Sujata, dragged him out of the river and nursed him back to health by giving him just a little bit of food, some rice and milk. But she nursed him back to health. And as Siddhartha started regaining his health, at least enough to the point that he could make some more rational decisions, he decided to sit in meditation until the understanding that he was seeking arose within him. And so there's a little bit of a fable about what occurred, but meaning that there's a lot of metaphors in this story about the malevolent god Mara coming after the Buddha and attacking him in different ways during his meditation. But of course, we understand those metaphors to simply mean what's occurring in his mind and his own resistance to awakening. But he faced every one of these so-called demons. He recognized the impermanent nature of every one of them. He understood, and this is explained very clearly in the Nagara Sutta, I won't get into that. He understood very clearly that these were things that are rooted in wrong views. That wasn't completely coalesced in his mind, but he understood that there was no basis in reality. So there must be something inside him that caused these things to arise and to become apparently real, even though knowing that they're not. And these were just concepts that arose in his mind. So in meditation, he continued this meditation. It's said for about 40 days. The length of time isn't important. But what is important is the meditation method that he used. Prior to this meditation method, he remembered a time when he was 5 years old, and he was similarly frustrated with his life. And he decided to just sit under a tree in his dad's backyard, or the palace backyard. It was quite a big backyard. And he was just going to sit there and try to quiet his mind. And he started being mindful of his breath, and his mind quieted, and he felt better. And he remembered that simple meditation technique all those years later, 28 years later, something like that. And that's the same method that he employed to quiet his mind by being mindful of the breath in his body, which is the same method that he would later teach in the 4 Foundations of Mindfulness. So to continue with the story, with the narrative, eventually his mind cleared and he awakened. And he understood at this point the nature of suffering in the world, the cause of it, and how to bring it to cessation. The next thing that he considered was, how can I teach this to other human beings that will prove to be a useful instruction, something that they can apply in a practical way? So the Buddha was never concerned about setting himself up as a savior. He didn't intend to teach a salvific religion. He simply wanted an opportunity to teach what he had learned about the nature of suffering and the path leading to that cessation of suffering. So the Buddha awakened to the profound understanding that it is ignorance that leads to all manner of suffering. But it's a very specific type of ignorance. He didn't awaken and then declare to himself, the human problem is just everybody's just so ignorant. Again, it was a very specific ignorance. What he recognized that people were lacking in understanding of was something called Four Noble Truths. And the first noble truth is that suffering occurs in the world. Why is that so profound? It's because most of us can acknowledge that there's suffering in the world, but most of us spend our lives doing everything we can to avoid what is common, a common human experience. And it's in that need to avoid suffering that we create false views, even the possibility that I can avoid suffering. So the Buddha described that suffering as birth is suffering, sickness is suffering, aging is suffering, death is suffering. Not getting what is desired is suffering. Receiving what is not desired is suffering. And then he would always conclude that brief description of suffering by saying, in short, the 5 clinging aggregates are suffering. If we don't understand the Buddha's Dhamma, that last line means nothing. But just for tonight's, for the purposes of the introduction, the 5 clinging aggregates are simply an awakened human being's description of the personal experience of suffering. So put that aside, and those are for later classes. The second noble truth is that craving originates and clinging perpetuates suffering. Craving for what? Ultimately, it's craving for a self-referential existence, craving for the things that I think I need to be happy. And as soon as we start establishing that in our life, we're setting ourselves up for suffering, because no matter what we can acquire, there's never going to be enough. And because things are impermanent, a lot of the things that we acquire aren't going to last too long. And then once we decide what we need to be happy, we need to be safe, we need to continue this sense of self, which is really conceit, we start clinging to those as if our life depends on it, because in a sense, our emotional life depends on it because we set ourselves up to depend on it. Then the Buddha said one of the most important noble truth, and it points to the impermanence of all things. He said that cessation of that process of causing suffering in our own lives is possible. And then he concluded the Four Noble Truths with saying that the path leading to the cessation of suffering is an eightfold path. That is everything that the Buddha taught was taught in the context of dependent origination and Four Noble Truths. He wasn't concerned about anything other than that. He wasn't concerned about the great questions. He wasn't concerned about anything mystical or magical. He wasn't, and again, he wasn't concerned about establishing a salvific religion. He wasn't concerned about gathering worshipers. He simply wanted an opportunity to teach human beings. He came up with the idea, with the system, the Eightfold Path system, as a way of recognizing our own ignorance of Four Noble Truths. And if you think about how brilliant this man was, he recognized immediately that a mind that's rooted in ignorance is a deluded mind. How does a deluded mind know that it's deluded? It can't possibly, unless it has a way of looking back at itself in a clear and well-concentrated way to recognize these deluded ideas. That's why he taught a very specific meditation method. And then he taught that meditation method to support the refined mindfulness, to hold in mind all factors of the Eightfold Path, to integrate the Eightfold Path as our path of developing profound understanding. So that leads to the type of mindfulness that the Buddha taught. Mindfulness means to recollect or to hold in mind. And we can do that with anything. I'm a recovered alcoholic and recovered drug addict. So a good example of that is for many, many years, I was very mindful of something that would eventually kill me if I kept it up. I could not get out of my mind the thought of the next drink or the next drug. And we do that. That type of addiction is an extreme example of what most human beings engage in. We hold in mind things that, whether they're views or ideas or objects we think we need, or relationships we think we have to have, or the next new car, the next brand new bowling ball, whatever it might be. We decide things that we need to be happy. We cling to them. We become fixated by them. We create an identity over them. And unless we achieve those things or get those things or acquire those things, we're unhappy. We're unfulfilled. The Buddha's brilliance is stating that grasping after any of those things, any impermanent object, event, view, or idea, is prone to suffering. And if we insist on it by clinging, we are setting ourselves up for disappointment. Another aspect of disappointment is when we become disappointed, we start losing our mind in a sense that we now become distracted or compulsed about what we need to now acquire to make ourselves happy, to make ourselves full or fulfilled. Does that make sense to everyone? All of you folks here tonight? So the Buddha taught a meditation method to deepen our concentration so that we can hold in mind the principles that will deliver us from ignorance to wisdom. And that is the Eightfold Path. So the meditation method that the Buddha taught is taught as one factor of an Eightfold Path. The mindfulness that the Buddha taught is mindfulness that is framed by the Eightfold Path. Anything that adapts that, accommodates it, embellishes it, or dismisses it in any way, including additional mindfulness techniques or different meditation practices, is something other than what an awakened human being taught. That doesn't mean that nobody should ever do those things. Of course, people were going to do that. If you're interested in developing the meditation and mindfulness of an awakened human being, it's described in the Four Noble Truths in the Eightfold Path, and then all the other suttas that are preserved in the Sutta Pitaka. And then to conclude this, this brief introduction to meditation and mindfulness, the Buddha taught two very specific suttas among hundreds, describing meditation and the effects of meditation. The first sutta is the Four Foundations of Mindfulness. And the Buddha begins, that's called the Satipatthana Sutta. The Buddha begins that sutta by instructing that we first become mindful of the breath in the body, then become mindful of feelings arising and passing away, and then be mindful of thoughts arising and passing away, and finally to be mindful of the present quality of mind. And what that's referring to is to be mindful of the effects of reacting to feelings and thoughts as they arise and how they ultimately affect the present quality of our mind. And that is to come to the realization that feelings and thoughts as they arise and pass away are impermanent. We come back to the sensation of breathing. We're training ourselves to not be distracted or disappointed by whatever thoughts or feelings arise. But if we do, we'll notice that the quality of our mind is less than peaceful. And at that point, we can learn, well, to at least be at peace with a less than peaceful mind state. And it's that quality of mind, to be at peace with no matter what's occurring, is an example of the quality of an awakened human being's ongoing quality of mind. In other words, they stay resting in that mind of equanimity. No matter what's occurring in the outside world, their inner world is at peace. And then, and just to clear up some confusion about the Satipatthana Sutta, and then that rather long sutta gets into the Buddha explaining how to apply that type of mindfulness to other factors of his teachings. And I won't get into the long list, but he concludes that sutta with finally saying and ultimately saying to be mindful of Four Noble Truths. Another important sutta is the Anapanasati Sutta, which is widely misunderstood and misapplied as instructions for meditation. And there's no instruction there. The Buddha, that whole sutta is the Buddha holding out a group of senior monks as an example of how they meditate and incorporate through that meditation practice different aspects of his teachings. And again, he concludes that sutta with saying, ultimately, we are mindful of Four Noble Truths. We need to do that. As beginners in meditation and mindfulness, there's an infinite number of choices out there. And of course, we're all free to find something that seems to resonate with us. But the point of this introductory talk and the point of the Buddha's Dhamma is to develop a very specific practice that very quickly, depending on one's effort and intention, very quickly can deliver in this lifetime a mind of lasting peace and happiness, a mind resting in equanimity. The techniques are very simple. The meditation method it's called Shamatha-Vipassana. Shamatha means to quiet the mind. Vipassana means to gain insight. That simple technique of being mindful of the breath in the body begins to quiet the mind. The insight that is gained, the Vipassana, is a very specific insight also. It's not some generalized insight. And it often doesn't occur on our cushions. In fact, if we're looking for that on our cushions, that can prove to be a distraction. That specific insight is into something called the three marks of existence. And that, very briefly, is that all things are impermanent. There's a first mark. It's called anicca. All things are impermanent. The not self-characteristic, or anatta, which is simply the Buddha's reminder that the views that we've used to create a view of self are views rooted in ignorance. They're wrong views. Let go of the views. They don't constitute a self. And from having a misunderstanding of the not self-characteristic and impermanence, anicca, suffering arises, the third mark of existence. So, of course, if that's the Buddha's concern, an awakened human being's concern, the insight, the focus of insight should be on the three marks of existence and really nothing else, because that proves to be just a distraction. So this is a very simple practice to develop, but at times it takes, I used to say that it's a practice of ease and joy, but it's not for the faint of heart. At times it takes something, it takes a large level of resolve or right intention to continue, and coupled with right effort. It's one of the reasons why those are two factors of the Eightfold Path, to continue to remind ourselves that it is my intention to put aside all of my ignorance and awaken, and I can then engage in right effort and develop the entire Eightfold Path. Meditation alone, I've never seen one meditation method, especially a singular method, that could deliver what is developed through an Eightfold Path. I've seen many people get lost in their single, meaning just meditation practice, and I've talked to enough people that have developed quite severe psychoses by just that singular insulated practice with no framework, no Eightfold Path to recognize what's arising and passing away in your mind. So it's very important, if you're going to practice what a Buddha taught, to actually practice what a Buddha taught. So that's the introduction. So thank you for listening. Any questions about that? any Andrew? Or just too many to
A lot of stuff.
Yeah, and the point of it is and all this shouldn't be overwhelming. It's developed gradually by simply developing the practice, being part of a Sangha. It's probably the last thing that I should say that I didn't say. I've been doing this for many years, well over 3 decades, and the longer I do it, the more I see the importance of a well-focused Sangha to develop a meditation practice within. The Buddha talked about 3 refuges, 3 jewels of the Dhamma, and one is the Buddha, then the Dhamma, and then a Sangha. And so we take refuge in the Buddha, which means that refuge means that we're taking comfort and safety in something. In this case, we're taking comfort that an awakened human being actually did what he's teaching us. And we take comfort in the fact that his teachings are still available to us, the Dhamma. That's a true refuge. And then to have a well-focused Sangha is the essence of true refuge, isn't it? And as we find, you really can't do it alone. So we're very fortunate that we have a well-focused Sangha here in Frenchtown. Diane, no questions or comments about the talk? Okay. We'll meditate. Now that we talked about it, we'll meditate for 20 minutes. So find your relaxed meditation posture. Gently close your eyes and gently close your mouths. And I should say that these, the guidance that I'm going to give in this meditation, and this is really just for the online, is the instructions come directly out of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the Satipatthana Sutta and the Anapanasati Sutta. So now is the time to meditate. Find your relaxed meditation posture, holding your back straight but not stiff. Your ears aligned with your shoulders, your nose aligned with your navel. Holding yourself softly, gently, lovingly. Allow yourselves to settle into this room, settle onto your seat, settle into your body, and settle into your mind. Notice the sensation of breathing in your body. Become mindful of your inhalation and your exhalation, your in-breath and your out-breath. While remaining mindful of your in-breath and your out-breath, notice if feelings arise and thoughts are flowing. We are sensitive and conscious beings. Feelings arise and thoughts flow. The purpose of meditation is to increase concentration and not be distracted by the arising and passing away of feelings and thoughts. Notice the arising and the passing away of your breath in your body. When you find that you're caught up in your thinking again, simply acknowledge the distraction and return mindfulness to your breathing. Relaxing your thoughts, remaining mindful of the arising and passing away of your breath in your body. Breathing in, calming bodily fabrications. Breathing out, calming bodily fabrications. Breathing in, calming mental fabrications. Breathing out, calming mental fabrications. We will continue to meditate for 20 minutes with callbacks every 5 minutes. Breathing in, calming bodily fabrications. Breathing out, calming bodily fabrications. Breathing in, calming mental fabrications. Breathing out, calming mental fabrications. noticing the arising and passing away of feelings and the arising and passing away of thoughts, while remaining mindful of the arising and passing away of your breath in your body. And we'll meditate for 5 more minutes. Please remain with your eyes closed, and we'll conclude tonight's class with the Buddha's words on metta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing, in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you for a wonderful class tonight. Peace.